and I'd like to welcome you to the Quick Start to Animation in 3ds Max. Quick Starts are a series of specially constructed courses meant to be followed in sequence and include valuable exercises to reinforce learned concepts. The lesson format for these Quick Starts will be similar to other training from digital tutors. We'll go through 3ds Max's animation tools in a very methodical way, making sure to cover the tools and techniques that are most important and enabling you to get up and running quickly. Each volume of a Quick Start will build upon the previous volume, enabling us to build up a project into a finished state. In this initial volume, we'll cover the basics of getting started with the animation tools in 3ds Max. We'll learn how to set our animation preferences and create keyframes. We'll learn about 3ds Max's dope sheet, which is used to read time animation. We'll also jump into the curve editor and learn how it can be used to polish an animation and cycle as well. To conclude the course, we'll learn how to preview our work in real time. While building a project together, you'll be provided with valuable knowledge, and the real power comes from being able to take the techniques you've learned and apply them in a different way to your own work. And with that in mind, you'll be presented with an assignment immediately following each volume. These assignments will challenge you to take the skills that you've learned in a particular volume and apply them to a different asset. These courses are designed to be taken in sequence, so we really encourage you to start with this volume and proceed all the way through to volume 3. Also that you can take advantage of the periodic assignments along the way and get the full learning. The last scene in the animation portion of Intro to 3ds Max. So this is what we create. It's a really fun set of lessons. We go through some really neat tools. And if you'd like to learn more about the animation tools that we'll cover in this course, I'd highly recommend you have a look at that course. You could also check out Introduction to Animation in 3ds Max to learn a bit more. Remember, the goal here in the Quick Start series is to just kind of take a quick look at these tools so you're aware of them. Now, getting right into the lesson, before any keyframes were set on this animation, it was very important to first check the animation preferences, just to make sure that, for one, I was animating at the right frame rate, 2, using the correct frame range, and overall, again, just making sure everything is in order so we can comfortably start to animate. So how do we access these preferences? Well, if you were to bring your attention to the bottom right-hand corner of 3ds Max, where we find the Time Configuration panel, to the right of that, this is where we access our Time Configuration dialog, or our preferences. So you'll notice that at the top we can go ahead and choose our frame rate, whether it's NTSC or film, PAL for TV, and a custom frame rate if you'd like. If you're unfamiliar with NTSC, this is what is commonly used for games. It's about 29.97 frames per second. And you'll notice how things start to change when we start to switch our frame rate. You can see how our timing is a bit off. That's why it's super important that we choose the correct frame rate ahead of time so we don't have to worry about throwing off any of our keys. And then to the right of that, these are just display options for our trackbar. So as we start to slide along the trackbar, how we would like our frames to be displayed. Sweet. And then underneath that, here's where we find our playback controls. So right now, as you can see, we're playing back at normal speed, but if we wanted to kind of slow down the animation a bit, just the playback here in 3ds Max, it's not going to affect the frame rate at all. We can go ahead and have this set to half the amount, and currently that's 24 frames per second. So it'll play back at about 12 frames per second. I'll go and click OK. We'll start back from the beginning and hit play. So notice that our timing has slowed. And sometimes this is a great way to study your animations when they play back a little bit slower. You can really scrutinize your performance and say, hey, maybe I'd like to change this pose. Maybe this pose isn't quite working, or maybe it is. But these are tools that we can use to help us create a better performance. So do take advantage of them. Let's go ahead and jump back here. Might go ahead and set this back to normal speed. Then you can go ahead and turn on looping if you'd like. If this is off, when we go ahead and click OK and hit play, once we get to the end of our active time segment, or our frame range, you'll notice that the animation will stop playing. So that's basically what that does. It's really straightforward, right? And then underneath that, what we have is our frame range. So you can see here that according to our current settings, our start time is 0 and our end time is 250. Rescale time, this is used to actually quickly scale or multiply your timing to either speed up your animation or slow it down. And you can learn more about this in Introduction to Animation in 3ds Max. But I think for a course like this, we wouldn't really need to get into rescale time. But note that it's a really cool feature. And again, feel free to take a look at Introduction to Animation in 3ds Max to learn more. And then underneath here, this is basically how we get to choose the keys that we step through. So this is another really neat option here in the time configuration panel. But I just wanted to kind of walk you through a few of these options. Let me go ahead and click OK. Something else to keep in mind that's really important when you start to create keyframes is the default in and out tangents for new keys. So this is right next to our set key button. If we were to go ahead and left click and hold, these are basically keying presets, how our keys will interpolate or transition between our keying range. So that's basically what these options do. And again, you can learn more about this in Introduction to Animation, but we will still cover this when we start to keyframe because it's really important, right? We want to set this ahead of time. That way we know what type of interpolation we have initially. All right, fantastic. So that's a look at our preferences here in 3ds Max. Now, in the following lesson, I just so you're aware of how they work, and I also wanted to show you something you might not have been aware of. Well, let's say we go ahead and get to it. So bringing our attention back to the bottom right-hand corner of 3ds Max, this is where we'll find our playback controls, right above the current time field. Now this first button to our left allows us to jump to the very beginning of our active time segment. So notice this, if I were to go ahead and left click and drag on the track bar to scrub through the animation, and this is actually a great way to study your work and make sure the performance holds up. This is kind of like flipbooking for 2D animators. But let's say if after scrubbing I decided to jump back to the very beginning of the animation, well, we don't have to scrub back to that time. We can simply go ahead and use this first button here. Nice. And then the button on the opposite end does just the opposite. It's going to bring us to the very end of our active time segment, hence the name Go to End. So we have Go to Start, Go to End, and now the following set of buttons will allow us to move one frame at a time. So here I am moving backwards in time, and we can go ahead and move forward in time. You'll notice that once we get to the end of the active time segment, and we use the button again, it'll cycle back to the very beginning. Sweet. And of course we have the play button in the center. So really straightforward stuff, right? Well, let me go ahead and show you something really neat about the play button. Let's say we head over to Tools, and we'll go to Manage Layers, and we will now unfreeze our mech layer. Now we can go ahead and select our model. Let's go ahead and grab his torso. So with that selected, watch this. Let's now go ahead and left click and hold on our play button and use the next playing mode. Notice we can use this to play whatever we have selected. How cool is that? So here comes the object. It emerges, and we could start to kind of study our animations this way and focus on any objects that might throw us off a little. So I really enjoy this feature because sometimes you're working on a really complex performance and you don't quite know where the issue is coming from, so you can go ahead and use this feature to pinpoint that issue. Awesome stuff. And then if you want to jump back to the normal playing mode, just simply left click and hold. There you have it. Nice. Something else I'd like to point out to you is our key mode toggle. So notice what happens when I go ahead and switch this to key mode toggle mode. You'll notice that now our icons change on our playback controls. At least go to next and then previous frame. Now it's previous key and next key. So what does this do? Well, let me go ahead and do this. I'll head over to the display panel. I'll make sure we can go ahead and see shape so we can grab our controls. Now you'll notice that when we select any one of our control objects, well, we have keyframes now, right? So if we wanted to, let's say, focus on the keyframes of either the left arm control or perhaps the center of gravity control, if we just want to get to our poses, we can go ahead and start to use the key mode toggle option here. So now if I want to jump to my next keyframe, I can go ahead and simply click on next key. Or if I want to jump to the previous key, here we have it. This works out to be a great tool when blocking in your work, because a lot of times when you block in your work, you have a single pose on one frame. You haven't quite refined the animation yet, which involves offsetting your keyframes. So if that's the case, you can start to jump through your poses very quickly by using this option. How cool is that? So again, I just wanted to point out the playback controls to you. That way, you can go ahead and start to use these tools to your advantage. You can start to correct your performances right here from the playback controls as you start to either jump to the very beginning of your animation, jump to the end, or perhaps toggle through your keyframes. And remember, when you're ready to jump back to the normal playback controls, just go ahead and turn off key mode toggle in 3ds Max. So since we're ready to set keys, let's go ahead and check our preferences first, right? We'll go ahead and jump to our time configuration panel. Let's check our frame rate. You can use any one of these. Let's say we go ahead and stick with film, 24 frames per second. And if anything, I'm using this just so we can get used to working with this panel. You never want to overlook any of these settings. Alright, let's go ahead and now click OK. Sweet. Next, we'll go to our default in and out tangents for new keys. So though we're not ready to talk about tangents just yet, remember this is a really important option nonetheless, because this is what determines our initial interpolation type. So for example, if you wanted to start by blocking in your work, if you were more familiar with the pose-to-pose method of animation, you can go ahead and use set tangents to step. And that's the type of interpolation you'd start with, which is not necessarily interpolation at all. Because once you get to a keyframe, that's when you see the pose. But once you start to scrub between keys, you won't see any transition at all. Alright, sweet. And then we have set tangents to auto. It's something I like to start with if it's not a complex character performance. If that's the case, I normally work with set tangents to stepped. But with set tangents to auto, this is going to smooth out your interpolation while preventing overshoots in your tangents. Overshoots are simply the result of your values moving past a set keys value. Alright, sweet. So I'll go ahead and stick with set tangents to auto. Now it's time to go ahead and head over to key filters to figure out what type of keys we'd like to set. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck scale and IK parameters. So we only have position and rotation to worry about. Nice. Alright, so we can go ahead and close out of this dialog. And then we get to decide what type of keying mode we would like to use. So take a look. We have auto key and we have set key. We're not quite ready to work with auto key yet because it can mess us up if we're not careful. But do note that it will, yes, automatically create keyframes. So we'll learn how to use that in the following lesson. But let's go ahead and work with set key. I really enjoy using this because this is a great way of kind of testing out a pose, seeing what works, and if it doesn't work, it's easy to revert back to the previous pose. Sweet, so let's say we go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and grab the control object in the center named Anim Swivel Weapon. The next thing we would do is go to the frame that we'd like to create a pose on, and then we would create the pose. Once the pose has been created, we're then ready to use the Set Keys button. We're ready to record that pose. So on frame 0, I'm going to go ahead and use this neutral pose. I'll go ahead and click on the big key button here. Nice. Now we can go ahead and move forward in time, let's say to about frame 15. We'll basically create a bop, so we'll go ahead and have the turret translate. Let's say we go ahead and bring up the turret to create our next pose. Now let's say if you don't quite like this pose and if you want to revert back to your previous pose, it's just a matter of dragging on the track bar. The reason why this has happened is because 3ds Max remembers the last key that was sent. So this is a recorded pose in time. Since we never created a keyframe, this change was never recorded, so it's just going to revert back to what it does remember. Now if we do like this pose, it's just a matter of clicking on the Set Keys button, and there you have it. It has been saved. So watch this. Now we're able to see a transition when we start to scrub. How cool is that? Let's go ahead and play the animation. So it moves up, and now it's time to have it drop. Now let's go ahead and think about weight. We can have it drop pretty quickly, but not too fast. If it happens too quickly, well then it'll look very snappy. So we can go to about frame 22 and go ahead and drop the turret so that it's a little bit lower than it was on frame 0, and then we'll go ahead and use our key button here. Let's go ahead and hit play to feel the animation and see if we like the change. Alright, so that seems to be a little bit too fast. I'll go ahead and take this key and just drag it down just a few more frames to about frame 25. We can do that by simply left clicking and dragging to grab the key, and then we'd left click and drag to move the key. You'll notice how your cursor changes when you're over a keyframe. Let's go ahead and hit play. Sweet, I kind of like that timing. Now we can go ahead and have it bop and settle to its resting position. So let's go to about frame 31 and we'll bring it up just a little bit because it should gradually come to a stop. And then we'll go ahead and have it fall again a few frames after that. Let's say on about frame 36, we'll go ahead and bring it down. Key. And then a few more frames after that, on about 40, we're going to bring it up ever so slightly. This should be a really subtle change. And a few frames after, on about frame 43, I'll just go ahead and drop it down ever so slightly. So now it should gradually come to a stop. Let's go ahead and play the animation back. How cool is that? So we've created some realistic weight here in our turret with just a few keyframes. Fantastic. So that's it for this lesson. I just wanted to show you how to create keyframes and to remove these if you ever need to. Just go ahead and highlight the keys to remove and hit the delete key on your keyboard. But chances are we don't want to do that here, so I'll go ahead and bring those keys. It's going to automatically record that change. Also do keep in mind this, if there are no keys on the object and we start to kind of move it around in auto key mode, 3ds Max is going to create a keyframe not only on our current frame but also on frame 0. So again, do keep that in mind, because if your active time segment goes from, let's say, frame 5 and on, you might not be aware of the key that was created on frame 0 if your object did not have any keys initially. Alright, so watch this. I'm on frame 52 now. Let's go ahead and switch over to auto key mode. You can see how the border changes just slightly. It kind of dims, just to let us know we're in a different keying mode. But watch, if I were to go ahead and rotate the turret to look up, you'll see that, yes, a key has been made on 52 and also on frame 0. So here's the result of that. Nice. So let's say we go ahead and have some fun here with auto key. Something else I'd like to point out is that if you would like to test out a pose, just go ahead and turn off auto key and turn on set key mode. And then you can go ahead and start to kind of rotate however you'd like. And the only way to save that change is to use the keying button here. If we don't want to save that change, just simply scrub away from that frame and no change will be recorded. Nice. But we do have to be in one of our keying modes. If we are not in any keying mode, this is a way of offsetting our keys. So if I were to go ahead and have this look down, you can see what happens now. We've just offset our keyframes. So sometimes that works out to be great, sometimes it does not. So do be really careful about that. I'll go ahead and undo back, pressing Ctrl Z a few times so that the turret will point forward. Alright, nice. Let's go ahead and turn on auto key, and we'll go ahead and start with the swivel control. That's the center of gravity control object. So with that selected, we can then go ahead and jump to frame 0 And with auto key on, I'll go ahead and have the turret look in our direction. Alright, cool. Now, if we were to go ahead and scrub forward, you can see, yes, the keyframe has been saved. However, the turret's going to start looking forward again, and that's simply due to the fact that because of our key filters here, you can see rotation was checked. So we have this keyframe that we'd have to remove on frame 15, but only the rotate keys. So how do you do that? Well, with the key selected, you can now go ahead and right-click on top of the key to get to its properties. And then from there, you can go to delete key and simply uncheck the rotation list. Here it is. So now all of our rotate keys have been removed from that frame. So we can do that for the others, and this is just one way we can remove these keys. We'll have a look at another way when we jump into the dope sheet in the following lesson, as well as the curve editor. And we'll get into that very soon. So I'm just going through and removing all of these unwanted rotation keys. Go ahead and right click and choose delete key and choose the group that we would like to remove. So just two more. There's one and there is two. So by the end of this, once we remove this last set of keys, the turret should look in our direction again, and it most certainly does. Alright, sweet. So let's say we go and have it swivel to look in the opposite direction now. And we could have that happen on, let's say, about frame 28. Sweet. So it's kind of looking around. Let's go and hit play. And then we can have that gradually come to a stop. So in about frame 49, we can go ahead and rotate it in the opposite direction, but not as much. And then, let's say on about frame 63, we'll go ahead and rotate it in the opposite direction. Again, it's starting to come to a stop here. Let's say on about frame 72, we'll go ahead and rotate it in the opposite direction, but not as much. And then on about frame 80, we'll go ahead and have it stop here. So we're going to have it look forward again. Let's go ahead and hit play to take a look at what we've done with auto key. Just kind of looks around, and then it comes to a stop. How cool is that? And again, it looks natural because we have added a bit of a cushion and a bit of recoil to the action. So it doesn't just come to a stop when it looks, it gradually comes to a stop. And that's the recoil side of it. Exciting. Alright, so now that we've added some movement here, feel free to now animate the pitch control the same way. Now let's say we go ahead and create a key first. Let's say on about frame 25, so it doesn't happen at the beginning of the animation, just so that this looks a little bit more interesting. And so that the rotation gizmo matches the orientation of this control, I'll go ahead and switch our rotate mode here at the top to gimbal mode. Fantastic. So once we've done that, we can then go to our key filters. Let's go ahead and uncheck position. So we're only setting rotation keys. And we can now go ahead and click on our big key button right here on 25. So now we can go ahead and have this look up on about frame 38. And then we'll have it cushion just a bit. And we'll add a little bit of recoil here. So we'll have it look up still, but let's go ahead and make sure it just doesn't come to a stop, right? It's not necessarily lifelike. So a few frames after, let's say on about frame 47, we'll go ahead and rotate it down just slightly. And then a few frames after that, on about 54, we can go ahead and rotate it back up ever so slightly. And just a few frames after, on about 58, we'll go ahead and rotate it down just a bit. How do we figure out these frames, by the way? Well, it really helps to not only study life, but to also experiment with your own animations. Kind of figure out what works best for you. That way you can start to basically create your own style, which is super exciting, right? You can start to experiment and figure out what works for you, what makes you excited about animation. And then at that point, that's when things get really interesting. You can start to create stories in a unique way. I'll go ahead and hit play. Let's go ahead and see what we've done. Cool, so it kind of looks around and then it gradually comes to a stop. So we got a good sense of weight. How awesome is that? Again, we did that with just a few keys. And thinking about a few animation fundamentals. Great, well that's it for this lesson. Now in the following lesson,